You've said that you're prepared to reveal how Labor Party in New South Wales operates, and you've called it undemocratic and written about the corrosive power that operates in New South Wales Labor, and this is in a submission into the review into New South Wales Labor Party. Why do you think the New South Wales Labor Party is undemocratic and corrupt?
Shari, I've spent the last 4 years studying China, the Chinese Communist Party, pretty closely, and I have to say that organisation's more democratic than New South Wales Labor under its current structure. And this isn't aimed in any way at the things that are being examined at the moment at the ICAC. This is just, I believe, a once-in-a-generation opportunity that New South Wales Labor has to make real changes, to become more democratic and to have a 21st century system for a 21st century party.
So if it's not aimed at what's going on at ICAC, the extent of the undemocratic nature of Labor is even worse than we realise.
Well, I think that if you peer inside, if you've been inside the system and see how it actually works, and I'm talking about the political side of the Labor Party here, not necessarily the administrative or governance side, but politically, the General Secretary, one of the most powerful people in Australia, second most powerful person in the Labor Party, is effectively handpicked by a small group of right-wing union secretaries. They are then marched into a room full of New South Wales right members, and those members are told that this is going to be their next leader. They agree with that decision by affirmation, which means clapping, and then the annual conference in the Administrative Committee, which are just rubber stamps for the General Secretary, essentially do whatever the General Secretary wants. The number one rule of the New South Wales right is you always back the General Secretary.
So you've said that union bosses hand-pick that powerful role. You've just described it as the second most powerful in the country. Were you beholden to the unions while you were New South Wales General Secretary?
Well, look, I think that traditionally the rule that says you always back the General Secretary gives some balance to that arrangement. But at the end of the day, if you're going to ask me who were the most important people to me when I was General Secretary, they had to be that small group of union secretaries that had put me there.
Well, isn't this a problem, generally speaking, or even broader than this, that era after era you had Sussex Street General Secretaries, in fact, being the faceless men or the kingmakers who decide who the federal Labor leader and therefore Prime Minister would be? You know, we know the faceless leaders, the General Secretary of New South Wales at the time overthrew Kevin Rudd for Julia Gillard. Isn't this a problem, therefore, and quite corrupt? That it's unions, in effect, deciding who will become our Labor Prime Minister if, as you say, the union leaders elect the General Secretary, who then decides the federal Labor leader and Prime Minister.
Look, I wouldn't say it's corrupt. I think it's undemocratic. And I should say that the changes introduced by Kevin Rudd after the 2013 election, or just before the 2013 election, to directly elect the federal Labor leader, have changed a lot of that, and a lot of the power of the General Secretary federally has been eroded because of that. But here in New South Wales, it's a different kettle of fish. I mean, the General Secretary is without a doubt more powerful than the state parliamentary leader. Bob Nanva, who is a good guy, a great guy, I think he'll be a great General Secretary, but right now he's probably more powerful than Jody McKay, and Jody needs to fix that. And this review gives the Labor Party an opportunity to make the changes that are required to fix that problem.
So when you were the General Secretary, the second most powerful person in the Labor Party, there were hundreds of thousands of dollars of Chinese donations coming in, some of which have been under investigation by ICAC, but not all. What did you do in return for these donations?
Look, I can't discuss things that are being discussed at the ICAC. I just can't go into that at the moment. I remain under summons and I just can't comment on that inquiry.
What about more broadly, the level of the donations that were coming through to New South Wales Labor? You've said that it was from donors who were seeking to influence the party at the federal level. You were the second most powerful person. What did some of these donors try to get you to do in return for this cash?
Look, they never really asked me to do anything in return for the cash. Ultimately, donations do come in. They do seek influence. That's correct. A lot of the time they seek proximity to power. They want to meet people. They want to be seen with people. But in terms of interfering in the political system, I was never asked to do anything like that.
When you say they seek influence, what do you mean by that then?
They want to be close to the people in power.
Are they seeking any particular policy changes to ease the path for developments to go ahead? What are we actually speaking about?
Look, I was never asked to do anything like that. I never saw anything like that. It didn't happen during my time as General Secretary.
You came up through the ranks and benefited personally in terms of a financial sense from the role of General Secretary, as well as having immense power. Isn't it a bit rich for you now to produce this submission and say that it all should change?
That's a good question, Shari, and I can understand why people would be saying that. And ultimately, it's up to the Labor Party and Mr. Lavarch, Professor Lavarch, I should say, to decide whether or not he's going to accept my submission. But I'll say this to you, Shari, no one knows that position and the power and the sources of power better than me. And I believe now is the time for New South Wales Labor to make real change, to change the power of that position, the General Secretary, to change the structure of the Labor Party. And I think I can make a valuable contribution, and that's why I've made this submission.
When you left this high-profile role, it was in very controversial circumstances at the time. Someone who then offered you your next job was the powerful Chinese billionaire Huang Zhongmo, who paid you hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think $600,000. What work did you do for him?
Look, again, I can't go into things that are being examined at the ICAC. I'm happy
to talk about
what I'm doing now.
That's a matter of fact, though. That's not just something that was subject to the ICAC investigation.
It's something that has come out during the ICAC.
What work you did over a 3-year period.
These are questions that I've been asked at the ICAC, and I can't re-answer them here, Shari. I simply can't.
But
I can talk about what I'm doing now.
What work you did in your day-to-day 9-to-5 job over a 3-year period isn't just limited to ICAC. Surely you can answer that. What work did you do for Huang Zhongmo over 3 years?
As I said, Shari, I just can't go into things that are being discussed at the ICAC. I'm happy to talk to you about my new career as a criminal defence lawyer. Had my first win this week, and I'm very proud of that. I'm no longer associated with Huang Zhongmo. I don't have an office in any of his buildings, and I'm running my own show.
I know you can't speak about that $100,000 donation that ICAC focused on specifically, but looking at Chinese donations more broadly and other donations as well, do you believe that Bill Shorten and other MPs knew about the massive Chinese donations that were coming into the Labor Party?
Of course they did. Absolutely. Of course they did. I mean, at the end of the day, it was the campaigns for them to, for their seats. It was Bill Shorten's campaign to become Prime Minister that those donations were funding, of course.
Were they putting pressure on you to get more and more donations to fund their campaigns?
Oh, no, that doesn't work that way. But ultimately, everybody knows that you've got to pay for campaigns. They know that money's got to be raised. Of course they knew that Chinese money was coming in.
Was there a target of how much they wanted you to reach to be able to fund a successful campaign?
Not on me, no.
Are they lying then when they say that they didn't know about the donations? Because that's what we've heard from Federal Labor, that they knew nothing about this, and they've tried to distance themselves from this scandal that's been engulfing the New South Wales head office.
Well, I can say to you that I don't believe Anthony Albanese would have known anything about it or had anything to do with it. I mean, Anthony's not the sort of guy that ever got involved in these sorts of things. He's not from the New South Wales right. He spent his whole career fighting the New South Wales right, and I don't believe that he had anything to do with it. As for other figures, such as Mr. Shorten, of course he knew.
Shorten was also paid a federal $55,000 donation for lunch with Huang Zhongmo. Did he know he was getting a donation for that lunch?
That donation was organised and that lunch organised by the Federal Secretariat, but I assumed that the reason why he would have gone to that lunch is he would have known about that donation.
So in your view, is this problem bigger than just Sussex Street?
I think that ultimately what I'd say about that, Shari, is that the laws that exist in New South Wales now, which limit corporate donations to $5,000, are good laws. It's a good system. It stops big donations, which are the problem. And I think the federal donation laws are like the Wild West. And before the recent changes, they were even worse. Anybody could donate any amount of money, and they could report that with a PO box. And that was a big problem. And I think that federal donation laws need serious changes.
In terms of meetings federally, how many meetings did Bill Shorten and other federal MPs have with Huang Zhongmo?
I couldn't tell you that, Shari. I just don't know.
Countless?
Look, I wouldn't have said it would be countless, but that they would have been meeting with a lot of Chinese donors.
And in those meetings, I mean, you would have been present at some of them. Were there attempts to influence China's federal policy?
No, it was never discussed. And look, these donors never really wanted to talk about Federal Labor's policy on China. That's just not what they were interested in. And I think the real influence on Federal Labor's policy on China is the massive trade that we have with China. Our economy, a large part of our economy benefits from trade with China, and I think that's a good thing.
How plausible is it for us to believe that? I mean, we know Sam Dastyari had a raft of personal bills paid for by Huang Jingmo, and he then came out and did a press conference where he reiterated China's position on the South China Sea. So how can we possibly believe that these donors weren't seeking to push China's position federally? Oh,
well, you've met Sam Shari. He's not the he wasn't the typical parliamentarian. I mean, Sam's paid a very heavy price for that. He's admitted he did the wrong thing, and I think he knows that was a mistake. And I honestly believe that was an isolated incident.
Was Labor using Huang Jingmo and other wealthy Chinese figures as a piggy bank?
Look, I think that Chinese donations have become quite a large part of the Australian federal landscape for both parties. And I think Chinese money is something that has been flowing into the coffers of both parties. And I think that as big corporations move worldwide to not donating, that is creating a vacuum which is being filled, I suppose, with Chinese money.
There was a meeting that I've written about with former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd 2 weeks before the 2013 federal election. You organised this meeting, and at the last minute you invited Bob Carr, who was then the Foreign Minister. It was at the Park Hyatt in Canberra in a luxurious suite. And according to Bob Carr's Diary of a Foreign Minister, he wrote in it that you told him that you intended to get $100,000 from this donor. Who was the donor? Oh, look, Shari, I'm not going to reveal that. I remember the night the donor wanted to meet Kevin Rudd. He wanted to show off to his children that he could meet Kevin Rudd. I don't know what they talked about. It was all in Mandarin, and I couldn't speak it back then. But I mean, that is a typical interaction. Essentially, what they want to do is to show off to their friends and their family that they can get meetings like this. Why won't you say who the donor is? Oh, look, Shari, it's a long story, and maybe another time. What is it? We have time. This is Sky News. Why can't you say? Sorry, Shari, I've answered the question, and I'm not going to go into it. Did you end up getting the $100,000 from this donor? We got a donation, yes. Was it $100,000? No. More than that? Shari, I'm not going to go into the details of it, maybe another time. In terms of the involvement of federal MPs in getting Chinese donations, you said they absolutely knew about it, that donations were coming. Is there therefore a protection racket now over the sitting federal MPs to save their careers? I don't think there's a protection racket, and to be honest, I think it's probably a good thing that federal MPs aren't heavily involved in donations. I think it's something that should be handled by the organisational wing of the party. And I have to say, but they are involved with them. I mean, you're dragging them to meetings 2 weeks before a federal election in order to get big donations, so they are involved. Well, look, ultimately, if a donor wants to meet somebody and the person agrees to meet with them, but I mean, that's been published, that meeting's been published. But in all of my time as General Secretary, all of my involvement in the Labor Party, I haven't seen any of those federal politicians being influenced in the decisions that they made by those big donations. And I think the Labor Party's position on our relationship with China is driven more by the very sensible approach that we have to take on trade. How can the public believe that is possibly the case when there's, literally millions of dollars coming in from wealthy Chinese donors delivered in Aldi bags of cash? Well, I mean, you've made a comment there and about something that's currently before the ICAC, and I just can't make a comment about that. Look, let's go to a very specific deal. There was a deal to have New South Wales MLC, Ernest Wong, who was in the Legislative Council, for him to replace former State Labor Minister Eric Roosendaal. And you then, obviously later got a job with Huang Jingmo. Did you stitch up this deal? No, it's nothing to do with me. Who organised it? Well, Sam Dastyari was the General Secretary at the time. And so he organised this deal? He organised for Ernest to get into the upper house. As for the rest of it, I don't think so. And Ernest was a very close associate of Huang Zhengmo. I mean, wasn't this a situation, do you think now, where Huang Zhengmo, who we now know is a figure linked to the Beijing government, effectively had a politician in the Legislative Council?
I'm not sure how close they were, and I'm not sure that Huang Zhengmo is actually connected with the Communist Party.
Do you regret any of these donations or involvement in these matters from your time as General Secretary?
Look, to be honest with you, I probably regret ever being General Secretary, Shari. As I look back on it now, and I see now I have a second chance in life to make a new career, and I'm going to be the best criminal defence lawyer that I can be, and I'm going to get out there and do the best I can for my family.